Welcome, soldiers. My name is Commander Cyrious. Well, occasionally we invite some of the developers onto the channel to get a behind-the-scenes look at Planetside 2. You'll see some of those links in the upper right of the screen. But for the 10-year anniversary, we decided to go backwards in time, and we invited on Matt Higby, the original creative director of Planetside 2. This originally aired live on Twitch, and you'll see the whole thing now. If you check the bottom of the video, there will be some chapters so you can navigate through the whole interview. Matt Higby, how you doing today?
Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, it is great to have you on, man. Before we get dived in, I got to check with chat. Is my audio working? I screwed this up with Andy Sites and with Rel, so can you guys hear him all right? There we go. We got him.
Nice.
Matt, you are just, it's a sight for sore eyes. We miss you, man. How you been?
I've been good. I've been busy. Yeah, good.
Cool. We remember you as Nanite Ned and Rum and Cola. And I wanted to ask you a couple questions about that. Nanite Ned, did it come to you like in a dream, or how did this arrive to you?
Man, Nanite Ned was an interesting story, actually. So we just needed to do some promotional video. And it was just a typical kind of low-budge promotional video shoot that we were going to do. And we came up with this idea to do a used car salesman shtick. I remember like trying to sell it, and they were like, "Oh, we'll get you some stuff." And I came into the AV room, and again, this was like ridiculously low budget, but they had like some plastic guns and stuff, and
Nice.
I was like, this stuff looks terrible, man. It looks like it's awful. So I actually like drove to a what do you call it, a military surplus store.
I was going to say, I mean, it looks like you got real 50 cal rounds on you.
I had to like buy some additional stuff to make it work a little bit better. But then the entire time that I was driving there, I was like trying to figure out what the voice of the dude sounded like. So I was sitting in my car like a lunatic talking to myself. Howdy, folks. You know what all the lines were, trying to basically get the voice right.
Oh, I love it.
And basically, like that was where all the lines came from too. Was me just like bullshitting around in my car,
Cruising around. Were you imagine you're cruising around as Sunday?
Something. Yeah, exactly, man. I needed to go for a resupply. But no, it was and it was funny because we were doing this. I don't know. I guess at that point we were doing pretty guerrilla kind of marketing stuff on the team, where there was a couple folks on our team who were sort of coming up with what we wanted to do. There wasn't like a concentrated, like professional marketing effort built up quite yet. It was still a little bit early in the project.
Right. Yeah.
And so that video, we did that whole video without anybody really approving a script for it or anything else. We did the whole thing, and we had this whole our AV team was rad. They, would just dive into the memes on this stuff. So they loved it, and they kind of took it to, the level that you saw it at. But then it straight up got rejected. So like the way the world has seen that video, that movie is like part of a Jace Hall show scene, right? Like it was released as part of a kind of skit where it seemed like Jace Hall was producing this commercial for Planetside.
Right, yeah, I remember.
And the real story of it was we made that video and we were going to put it on YouTube, and like straight up, I swear to God, Smed saw it. Was like, "Fuck that! You guys cannot put that up. That makes us look like a total joke. This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen." And
oh no!
Legitimately, he was like, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. You guys cannot put this on the internet. It's gonna make our game look like a joke. Do you think our game's a joke?" And I was like, "I don't think the game's a joke, dude. But I think it's okay for us to have kind of jokes in the game universe, you know what I mean? Like I don't think it has to be so serious, And anyway, we went back and forth on this, and it basically got a hard kibosh, right? Like it was just like straight up no.
Oh,
but
man.
John, like all this is to say, like I'm not like trying to say that Smed has no sense of humor. He has an awesome sense of humor. I think he thought it was funny, but he was just like, this isn't the tone we want.
I get it. You're like part of Sony, right?
Exactly. And so like straight up, yeah, he's right? It would have been goofy for us to release it as like us, right? But the thing that was amazing, and this is like the universe coming knocking on the door and making like an opportunity work, is we loved the video and we were kind of heartbroken. I remember like myself and our PR manager at the time, Taina Rodriguez, like I was like almost crying to her. I was like, it was so good. Like it turned out so good. I'm like so sad that the world's never going to get to see this thing. And that's basically where it sat for months and months. Because we had that video a long fucking time before it came out.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and then we were doing some shots with Jace, and like we knew him pretty well from doing some other shit, and we were like, dude, like let us show us this video, and you give us your take on it. Just give us your take on it. Tell us if you think this makes us look like fools or not. And like he saw it, and like he was watching this thing, and everybody's dying. He had his production crew in there, and they're watching it. And everybody's just like, this is like, everybody could completely understand. Like, yeah, Smed was right. You guys shouldn't have released this. But like, this is funny. Like, how can we figure it out? And like, we managed to. I was like, can we figure out how to release it through you? And we pitched to him like this whole thing where like we could do a skit. And this was kind of part of working with Jace. If you ever watch the Jace Hall show, like he goes around to different game studios, so he knows folks, and they basically on the fly will come up with some little skit that they're going to do within the studio to kind of like, it's half improv, half planned. But we did a bunch of these little skits with them, right? And one of them was basically this thing where we turned this into a trailer. Where we made this whole thing where they were filming this trailer with us or whatever, right? And we were like, this is great because we're going to be able to use this video that we made that we thought was amazing.
Wow.
And we were able to release it in a way where it didn't make us look like we were idiots, even though it was produced by us being idiots, right?
That is hilarious.
Yes, it was what a beautiful thing, right?
And that's so funny because, us as players, we're like, it's fun to see kind of the person, right? You see it as a faceless developer that's corporate and it's all clean and pretty. And this is like, you're seeing guys having fun, right? They're just having fun.
It's fun.
That's hilarious. That was just such a ride to get there.
Yeah, like at one point, there's a point in that video where like somebody tosses me a Nerf gun from off the screen.
Okay.
And it was like, that was actually my Nerf gun that one of our artists, actually, this is another thing that maybe folks will like blow people's minds, but that had gotten like a paint over. One of our artists on the Planetside team was like, "Oh, I just love to paint miniatures. I would love to paint that gun, and I'll give it a Nanite Systems paint job." And he like took it home and painted it, and it looked like really professional, really great. That dude is the guy who runs a game studio right now called Night Dive Game Studios. His name's Stephen Kick, and so he like ended up leaving Sony and started remastering all these old school games like System Shock and stuff like that. Now he has quite a nice little business going, re-releasing games, optimizing them, and putting them out.
That's sick, man. What's the name of that again?
He was a hard service artist working on the Planetside team.
Oh, cool. What's the name?
Night Dive Games. Yeah.
Night Dive Games. Okay. Hey,
so if you like followed System Shock or any of that kind of stuff, like I think he had a super successful Kickstarter several years back, but since then they've released dozens and dozens of games, maybe hundreds of games by now. They're one of the biggest sort of perseverers of digital art.
Wow.
In this day and age. Yeah, it's great. It's
that's
really
cool.
Yeah,
man, there's been some guys that have done some sick cosplay type of weapons. We saw a Vanny weapon. We've got a lot of the NS weapons. It's been some impressive ones.
It's neat. It's really neat to see people. We were just talking about this before we went live. Like, Planetside, you can look at it and say, okay, it's a relatively small game, whatever, but it has like such a dedicated, attached, passionate group of people playing it, and it always has, right? It's always benefited tremendously from the
it really has
kind of uniqueness of it. There's no other game that really scratches that itch, right? I remember saying that when we were first launching Planetside 2, that if you're a Planetside 1 player, there's never been anything that scratched that itch for you, and that's what we're going to try to do. And I still think that Planetside 2 is alone in having done that, right? So if you're a person who for the last 20 years has wanted to play one of these kinds of games, like you're just playing Planetside.
That's about it. That's exactly right. And so, speaking of that, I wanted to go back just very early when this was in its infancy. How did you get involved in the project? Were you always super excited about it? Was it just the next thing in line? Can you just give us an anecdote of how it came to fruition?
Sure. I wasn't that excited about it, actually. I liked Planetside. I thought Planetside was really cool. It had some really amazing, innovative game design in it. But I was actually sitting on a greenlit pitch for a completely different game that, if I were to describe it now, was something like a third-person Overwatch. That was kind of what I was trying to design. I was a mega Dota hardcore fan back then. I loved roster-based games. And cool. That's what I wanted to do right after we shipped this game called Clone Wars Adventures. And so I got a pitch greenlit and had a little tiny team working on doing some initial exploration for it. And around the same time, Sony was working on releasing what they were calling Planetside Next. And Planetside Next was taking a bunch of Planetside 1 tech and doing new assets against it. And it was an attempt to basically make something closer to a match-based game using a Planetside scale.
Wow.
That's as close as I can say. And I think it was primarily designed for the Asian audience. So this was a game that was coming out of the Soga office, which was a Taiwanese sub-studio that Sony Online Entertainment had for a long time. And it happened to have the CTO of that studio happened to have been the former programmer on the Planetside team. So he had always wanted to work on a Planetside Next game. I think he had pitched that and they had run with it. But at some point that studio got shut down and it got brought back into San Diego. And at around that time, I was trying to get my little game greenlit. And the folks who were working on my game were the exact folks they would have needed to get this Planetside Next team deathmatch using the Planetside 1 engine released. And it was kind of doing some things, but it was also pretty much dead in the water. It wasn't seen as being like a big commercial success. It was just sort of like we have this game, let's see if we can get it shipped in the next 6 months sort of thing.
Gotcha.
And we had just spent a lot of time and effort on modernizing the Everquest engine and turning it into the Free Realms engine and the Clone Wars Adventures engine. And this was the point when like Andy Seitz and me and a handful of other folks got involved in sort of evaluating the Planetside Next project. And we ended up making a pitch that said, hey, I think we can do a legit Planetside sequel using the effectively the Clone Wars Adventures engine, right?
Right, wow.
And we can do a new graphics engine for it, and we can actually make a real legitimate sequel. And they were like, well, can you guys still do it in 6 months? Because we think this game needs to be done in 6 months. And we were like, well, we don't know. Probably not. But we started working on it anyway with that kind of time in reserve. We didn't have much more of a runway than that.
Wow.
And I think we were able to really quickly prove the tech and then really quickly start getting the game in front of people who, I think we were amazingly benefited by the fact that Smed was like a true believer from the beginning with the pitch, and he loved Planetside. He wanted to make another Planetside game, so it was an easy sell for him. If it was a hard sell for Smed, it wouldn't have never happened, right? But because it was, I think, an easy sell for him, he really wanted to make the game. He was able to like continue to buy us time. And I think we shipped the game in something like 18 months from the time that we like decided to start moving it over to the new engine. But it was in like 6 month increments. We never had more than 6 months to ship.
Okay.
Right. And then I think we started winning a lot of awards and getting shit at E3 and whatever it was, 2011, 2012. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of hazy on the details, but I guess it would have been 2012, right?
It probably would have been your marketing tour in 12 because you launched right at the end of it.
Something like that, right?
Wow.
And yeah, so I think we won a lot of awards and got a lot of hype, and people were like, holy shit, this game could actually be more than just a puff.
So you thought it was just kind of a light sequel that might attract some of the old people originally?
It wasn't even for the old people, man. It was honestly like a game for a very specific Asian audience that they thought. Okay. I think they were looking at games like Crossfire and some of these other team-based games that were just gigantic there and saying, dude, if we could do 5% of their numbers, we would be fine.
Wow.
And I think that was like the level of ambition that they had for it. It wasn't too much more than that. And so... it wouldn't have been something that I think people would have been like mega stoked as Planetside fans about.
Right.
And I think that was another piece of why it was easy for us to make the case. Because again, like there was people who really loved Planetside internally who were like, dude, we can't just drop this fucking turd and call it Planetside. We actually have to do something legit.
Right.
And
got to go big.
So, yeah, exactly. And then, again, I think the biggest thing was that we just had this tech stack. And when I say tech stack, like, if you were any other game company in the world that wanted to make a 1,000-player FPS game when we started and told you had 18 months to do it, every person would be like, that's insane. That's crazy. Completely nuts, right? Impossible. It's impossible. But what we actually had going for us was a amazing suite of server-side tech, right? We had like network packet libraries and like server infrastructure and the team and the knowledge base to be able to make 1,000-player FPS work. What we didn't have was the engine and the FPS mechanic specialization.
Okay.
And in 18 months, you can build that. In 18 months, you can build up a team of people to at least be able to like pull Battlefield 3 up in a conference room and make the weapon feel as good as that. Break it down and say, okay, here's what we need from Anim Tech. Here's what we need from client coders to be able to make it feel this, feel this weighty or whatever, right?
Right.
Like there's a lot of nuance. I don't want to like the artistry that's required to make the feel of those weapons great is insane. And I think today you wouldn't be able to achieve it in 18 months to the degree we have. But I think that's just the difference in the sophistication that these mechanics have taken in the last 10 years, right? 10 years ago, even though they were like a lot more sophisticated than they were 10 years earlier than that, when Planetside 1 came out, it was possible for us to replicate enough of the here's what a AAA FPS should feel like to get in the same ballpark at least, right? I don't think we ever got to the point where we were like, we're winning the same awards as those games. Not really, right? But we were like, if you tried to compare, they were trying to get like if DICE were to try to get 1,000 people on their server, they wouldn't have gotten anywhere in the same ballpark, right? Yeah. So we had this enormous advantage, right? And it just felt like it was stupid to not try to take advantage of it.
Yeah. So it sounds like the backbone of this. Now we always talk about Forgelight. We kind of group everything around it, but it's basically you had from Clone Wars and Everquest. You already had the backbone of what you needed to do this game.
Forgelight was just some bullshit that we sprinkled on the engine that we had built, right? We branded it. And I think there was some thought at some point that it could be some technology that we could turn into an actual product, right?
Oh, okay.
But I mean, it was essentially. I mean, Forgelight I think was technically the renderer, so it wasn't the Clone Wars engine. Okay. But if you were to look at all the lines of code that went into the game, the stuff that's the renderer compared to all of the back end tech.
Okay.
It's like, it's not even comparable, really.
Gotcha. That cool, man. On the ride to launch, were there any moments that you felt like you were like? Was it every 6 months you had a review and you were worried you were going to get shut down, or was it smooth? Was it rocky?
It was weekly. It wasn't every 6 months. Every 6 months would have been cool.
Okay. That sounds stressful.
It was stressful. It was a really stressful time, I think, at Sony. And it continued to be a stressful time after we shipped. We were never like, I think I was at Sony for 15 years. And I think the first half of the time that I was at Sony, it was like the land of milk and honey. They were making so much Everquest money, so much more money than anybody expected the studio to make, that it felt really great. But then, eventually the expectations start being like, oh, actually, we think you guys should always be making this much money. And at around the time that World of Warcraft came out, that whole thing started falling apart.
Yeah, the cash water flow probably dried up a little bit there, and then
and like it was a part of Sony, and Sony never really understood the business. For a long time, we were part of Sony Music, like Sony Online Entertainment was under Sony Music, like organizationally.
Right.
Bizarre. And then we were under Sony Pictures for a long time, which is just bizarre. Like it was never part of the PlayStation studio, right? Because what the fuck do they want with a PC MMO studio? They're not interested.
That's
so
wild.
Like, we were never part of like the software side of Sony. We were always part of this like weird. There had been like a business unit out of LA that was like the baseball games guys, and that's where Variant Interactive grew out of.
Okay.
And like in San Diego and in LA.
Okay.
And it was a weird.
So you guys were having to make your case to the music executives and the video executives, huh?
I never really had to do any of this kind of stuff. This was just where the studio was organized. And the only reason I even bring it up is to say that like organizationally within Sony, we were never really understood by them. So even when we were talking to the people in Sony that understood games, they were like, why the fuck do we care about PC MMOs? Because the people within Sony that cared about games cared about selling PlayStations, right? Like they weren't, unless we were talking about PlayStations with them, or this game could go on the PlayStation, you guys should care about us too. They were just sort of like disinterested in us. So there was never this like, trust or belief or funding hose coming from Sony. It always felt like we were like in if we aren't able to become profitable and prove that this business unit can be like profitable on its own, then we're fucked. Like we don't have an umbrella that's really taking care of us. And that ended up being the thing that killed SOE in the long term, and like had to have the assets bought out by, for a pittance, right? The amount of money that I think Sony Online got bought out for by Daybreak is like a rounding error to Sony, but they just didn't. They're like, who the fuck are these people? Why do we even want to keep this shit going? Who cares?
And I gotta say, it was because I played since Tonrus, and it was cool to see, hey, there's all these PC games, but Yeah, I didn't understand why it wasn't all PlayStation stuff, right? Why it wasn't in service of their big cash cow. So
Totally. When I was working there, the games that were getting developed in SOE were like EverQuest 2, there was like Star Wars Galaxies was getting made. There was the big PC MMOs, but there was an entire group of people that were making games like Wheel of Fortune Online and Trivial Pursuit Online. That was like the Sony Pictures gaming division.
Okay.
That we were like that was like half of the company was doing that kind of shit for a long time. Because again, we were like, it was all part of Sony Pictures, dude.
That's
like,
hilarious.
it was like the people who make Wheel of Fortune and stuff. Those kind of games, like. If you remember, this is going to be like a really old school reference, but there was like on the Something Awful forums back in like 2003 or 2002 or something, there were all these threads about the dating game. And there was all these like super inappropriate things that people are saying in the dating game. And I remember like I was in QA testing the fucking dating game because I was working on EverQuest, and like sometimes we would test those casual games too.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, man, it was great.
That's wild. And then, well, how about EverQuest Online Adventure? Like that was the foray of EverQuest into PlayStation. Who did that?
Yeah,
was that you guys?
That was us.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Sony Online. Yeah, so that was done by a team at SOE.
Okay.
And as you say, yeah, that was kind of like an attempt to sort of bridge the gaps a little bit.
Okay.
And I think EQOA was I think it was a PlayStation 2 game, right? For a PS2 game, it was super successvel. I don't think it was like commercially successful, but technically what it was. Well,
that's what I was wondering. Everyone I hear misses that game, but right, maybe it never had the critical mass to have Sony be like, oh yeah, this is worth doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it was also just a fucking pain in the ass to make.
Okay.
If I recall correctly, that team was like under a lot of stress. And that game got made right around the time that EverQuest 2 was getting made, right? I think it was shipped a year before EQ2.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Like, absorbed all the effort from that group.
Yeah.
Once it shipped. Maybe they got one expansion out or something. I can't remember exactly. EQOA was like I think I was working on Star Wars Galaxies when EQOA was doing all of its stuff. Wow. So I started out on a lot of that. I was in Austin.
Oh man, there's a lot of Star Wars Galaxies fans here too. So we're not going to get
my first game design job. That was my first legitimate time getting to work on game design. Yeah, 2002, 2003 on Star Wars Galaxies.
Did you have like a set? You're doing this city, or what was your portion of it?
Dude, I was making Han Solo's pants stripe be the right shade of red in HTML. No wonder
he looked so good.
No, but it's like I was doing the most bullshit kind of data entry design work you can imagine doing.
Okay.
They sent like 15 of us out from San Diego to go live in like a hotel and help ship the game for I think the last 6 months or so of ship. And I think of those 15 people, like 8 or 9 of them ended up getting hired on the dev team out there.
Wow.
Yeah, I came back and started working on EQ2.
Okay. Wow.
But it was cool. It was really cool to get to work on that. Got to, meet Raph Koster, work with him. Cinco Barnes, who was like the lead designer there, was like a really influential guy, really smart guy. And it was cool getting to see, I don't know, at that point, like before that game shipped, all of us, like who were MMO fans and everybody who worked at SOE was basically a pilgrim to the temple of MMOs in those days. You know what I mean? Like it was a bunch of kids who all like quit their jobs and dropped out of college and drove cross country to go work at Sony. That was like what the vibe was there.
That's
and
so
cool.
Like
we just worshiped these motherfuckers that were in the Austin studio, like all of these. Yeah, exactly. They were like, so cool. They were all like the, ex-privateer and wing commander and
all the veterans that made the games of your childhood, basically?
Totally. You know who my number one biggest point of contact out there and like one of my biggest career heroes for
who's that?
Still now? J. Allen Brack. He was like the associate producer of that game, and he was like the nicest, most transparent, like willing. Like I was in QA. I was the lead tester on Star Wars Galaxies for I don't know several months before they asked a bunch of us to move out there, like I was mentioning. So but like he would stay at work late to explain things to the QA team and talk you through like design decisions and kind of give you more information about stuff. Like he was so kind with his time and attention to people who didn't necessarily like warrant it from like you know what I mean?
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really, really cool.
I can imagine as
And
a Q&A team, you could easily be brushed aside as a unnecessary evil of development almost, but
especially like we were in San Diego and they were in Austin, and it was like a little bit of a siloed situation. But like every time he would come out to San Diego, he always made a point to like sit down with us and like not leave until he'd answered every single question. And like, I'm not kidding when I say that we were geeks. It would have been like if you imagine an SOE Live or something like that, where it's just like they're just like pestering you with questions.
Yep.
How do you become a Jedi? Tell me again. Like, do the thing. And like he would sit there, whiteboard it all out for us.
he did it.
Like, yeah, it was really cool, man. Like so. I remember like thinking about that about him for years and years and years, like how not just like intelligent and emotionally intelligent he was, but how kind he was. Like what a to have spent that much time with people who he didn't need to. I thought it was like
that's really awesome. Running into those mentors in life is just really important. So
yeah, it's been sad to see like what's happened over the last couple of years, and I haven't talked to him in a very long time. I haven't talked to anybody in years and years and years, but it seems like some gnarly shit went down at Blizzard or whatever, and it's hard for me to reconcile at the person that I know with some of the stuff that went on there. But,
ooh, that's tough. Do you is he getting caught up in that, or do you think he's just on the side and unassociated?
I mean, he was somewhat. I don't know. He resigned, so
okay.
I assume that he was either involved or didn't want to be involved anymore.
Oh, that's tough, man. That's real tough. Okay, I've got one more for you. And then I want to do just grab a couple community questions, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. So I guess in the game, you got it to launch. It's amazing. We love it. What is like your one? What you say is your triumph? Like some feature you got in the game, whether it's the gunplay or the gunplay or a vehicle or something. And then what's one regret? Something you really wanted to get in the game but had to get axed and you couldn't do it.
That's tough. I think if there's anything that I'd say that was like something that I pushed really hard for that ended up being in the game, it's the level of empire differentiation that's in there. I think there could have been more, and I wish there was more, but the fact that there are like weapon mechanics that are sort of unique and feel like they're unique was something that was a hard fight a lot with folks who had very good reasons for not wanting to do that.
So you had to battle to get some faction feeling in there.
I think most of the times most of the biggest fights that I had on the team were having to do with telling somebody that they were right, but I still needed them to do something else anyway. Like telling the balance team that I know that you're not going to be able to balance this, but it needs to be this way anyway. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there were times when we had, like, for example, we would figure out at some point very late in the continent's development that we needed to change weapon mechanics. Like the weapons felt better if we had damage fall off working in this way, but that meant that cover needed to be moved so that the cover density was, XYZ instead of ABC. Yeah. And that the change on the data of all the weapons is a little database change that you make. It's very easy, but the change to like update all of the zones to fix the cover density everywhere. All the bases. Yeah. Wow. We're not using Houdini to do this, right? Like it's very hand placed shit back then, right? Right. Nowadays, you would be placing this stuff procedurally and algorithmically, and it would be a lot easier for you to make mass scale adjustments, right? But this was caveman shit back in 2011 or whatever. So like we were doing it by hand, and you're saying, okay, well, I need 60 hours of level designer time to make this tweak happen, or it's a slightly worse gunplay experience. Right. So like I would have to have conversations sometimes with our weapons guys where I was like, oh man, like I know that the game, like what you're talking about, you're right, like this is better, but we can't invest that time in the levels to go back and change all this stuff in the levels. And in some cases that was the right call, and in some cases it was the wrong call. But like those were always the worst kinds of those were the worst kinds of things. Right. Yeah. And then your one regret. One regret. As it, when you were walking out the door, when you finally said, "Hey, my service here is done," thinking back, the one thing you would have liked to have done before the game, before you left. Well, I have a big regret, but it has nothing to do with the game, really. It has to do with, I think at some point working on that project, I really loved working on Planetside. Like it was a highlight of my life in a lot of ways, and a highlight of my career in almost every way. but it definitely became too much of an identity. And the who I felt like I was as a community person and as like a, I don't know, I would go home and play Planetside for 6 hours and then go to bed and wake up and, sleep for 4 hours and wake up and go work on Planetside. You know what I mean? And like, there was a point in time when the identity of me as a creative director was something that just mentally I couldn't really hold on to anymore. And it kind of, it fucked me up. So that was one of the reasons why when I left, it was the right time for me to leave. Was I was just losing myself in not doing a good job by the team, not doing a good job by the game, because like I was just too caught up in the identity of
Matt Higby. It wasn't. It was a Matt Higby that wasn't even you. Creative director Matt Higby.
Yeah, something like that. Wow. Yeah, and you get lost in this kind of thing, Yeah. And it wasn't like any of it was like I don't think it was like a. It wasn't some intentional kind of nefarious thing, and it wasn't even, I don't know. I don't think any of it was even bad necessarily, but at some point I took a look at myself and I said, like, this is I'm very attached to all of this. I'm super attached to this, and it's not healthy to be this attached to something which isn't actually who I am.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not like I was being fake about a persona or anything like that, but it was just like getting so caught up in the headspace of.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, that's going to be a wild dive, and I imagine the challenge of being, at the head or one of the people at the head of it and actually having to bring this thing to life, I just would suck you in even further, it seems like.
Yeah, I cared a lot about it.
Yeah.
I remember the last conversation I had with Smed. Well, not the last conversation I had with him. I've spoken to him since then, but like the last conversation I had when I quit was like, we were dealing with a lot of shit. We were trying to balance monetizing the game and keeping it profitable. This was at the time the company was selling, so like things were going poorly, and this was right before H1Z1 started really taking off, too, which is kind of like sad and ironic because I think if we'd gotten through that time period, then H1Z1 success would have like vindicated a lot of the things that had happened, right? But it was sort of before that, right? So it was at this trough. And I remember talking to him and I was like, I'm being asked to do all these things. And I'm looking at like every day I'm reading Reddit or I'm reading Twitter and I'm talking to people in game and nothing I'm being asked to do at work is the things that I'm being like asked to do in game or by the people who are playing the game. Like none of it matches. And in some cases it's like diametrically opposed. It's like you can't imagine a world where these things are possible and these things are happening. You know what I mean? And increasingly I'm agreeing more and more that these are the things that we need to focus on. Like these are what's really important, right?
And that being the community things or the ownership things, which ones?
Are the community things, the game integrity things.
Yeah.
Like the problems that needed to be solved in the core game that needed to be addressed completely before we like moved on to building embellishments and seeking new ways of new revenue streams and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And again, like none of this is to say that there were people who were being predatory or trying to do something unethical. It was kind of survival, and a lot of it was like looking at like, dude, why isn't this game just making more money? Like it's doing good numbers. It should be earning more money than it is. There's lots of reasons why a pure PvP game doesn't earn as.
Right. Yeah.
Been invented, then we would have been straight, right? But like we didn't have we didn't have the design tech back then figured out to be able to effectively monetize the game. And,
sorry, I lost one little line. What do you think would have saved it in terms of monetization?
Oh, I'm saying like maybe if we had known how to do battle passes back then, like we could have done a better job. Maybe if we had figured out one of these monetization methods that actually works for these more PvP oriented games nowadays.
Right.
But like back then, there wasn't a lot unless we started going into fucking gacha mechanics and things like that. Nobody really wanted to do it. Yeah. So.
And I remember thinking, not everyone's thinking back that this is a 10-year-old game. Like it's a little bit of the, this is extreme, pioneers get slaughtered, settlers prosper, right? Like online shooter games hadn't really figured out fully how to monetize themselves yet.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was. Yeah, so I think that was like towards the very end. Like I had that feeling of it's hard for me to go and run these initiatives that I think are counter to what we ought to actually be focusing on for the players and for the community. And that made it really hard for me to do my job.
Yeah.
But again, I think a lot of this was basically like me sort of losing myself to some degree in the role and in the community to some degree. I think I spent a lot of time feeling. It's funny. It's ironic because like when I came into SOE, I was more of an Everquest player than I was an Everquest developer. Right? Obviously, it's like my first day at the studio. I've been playing Everquest for 5 years or whatever, 2 years.
What servers you play on?
I was on Druzzle Row.
Okay.
I was on Solusec Row originally, and then my guild moved to Druzzle Row.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. But like I remember like having the sense of, and I think this is true of a lot of people who come into working at a studio as a kind of passionate player of the game. And I've worked with lots of people at lots of different levels now who are like this, right? Who, you know, they've been a super fan of this game, and then they get their first job in the games industry at that studio, and like sort of seeing what they're like. And for a long time, folks are more of a community member than a game team member. They're more comfortable channeling the community. They're more comfortable. They're more likely to like go home and tell their friends on Discord than they are to like go to work and talk to their, you know, they're still caught in the fantasy to some degree, right? They're still sort of like lost in this persona that they have. Yeah. And when I came into SOE, I was like that with Everquest for a long time, where I was still sort of like more of an Everquest player than like a developer. Right. And then, you know, over the years, I had stopped playing EQ as much and, you know, got more and more into like learning the development thing. But then when I left, it was almost the same thing. It was almost like I had come full circle where like the day that I left, I felt like I was more of a Planetside player than I was a Planetside dev. And I felt more connected to this like angst and why can't we be working on these things than I felt to the this is what we're doing thing. Yeah. I
always envisioned that you couldn't go back, but it sounds like you went full circle. I think you're vindicating a lot of players right now that have that same angst, right? Like, it's always funny. The players that love this game to death are sometimes the ones that are the worst to it, in a sense, vocally. And it comes from a place of they want it to be everything you imagined it to be, you know? Yeah. And it kind of sometimes it kind of comes across in a very negative manner, but
you don't get disappointed about things that you don't give a shit about.
Yeah.
You know, and people don't get angry unless they have some sadness first, right? Like it's just the way things go. I think when you see that type of vitriol, like that's a mature way to sort of parse it, right? Is you have to understand that comes from, and maybe it's not well expressed, right? But it comes from some deep love somewhere. Yeah. Right. No matter what, it comes from some pain that was caused by love, right?
You're exactly right. Okay, I'm going to rapid fire these last few so you can actually go to work tomorrow. First one was, what's your favorite faction?
NC.
NC, easy one. Now, this one I feel like you've just answered, but someone said, would you come back if they wanted you to develop Planetside 3?
Yes, but not right now. I'm doing something very cool. I'm really enjoying the game that I'm working on right now and the opportunities that I've been given and afforded. So not today, but I think that I think we talked about this, right? Like Planetside 2 is doing something. Planetside has always sort of done something completely unique. And the unique thing that it does, I love so much. The mass scale kind of tactical action shooter gameplay. It's like I would do anything I could to work on that kind of game again. I almost had a chance to with, I don't know how many NDAs I'm breaking.
Well, are
we running out of time? Should I not break any NDAs? If we're running out of time, I'll skip it.
No, we would love you to break some NDAs, but we don't want you in trouble.
I don't think I can get in trouble anymore because I'm in a different country. Okay. But at some point, I was working with an unknown publisher who I won't say. And there was an opportunity to do something with, I think, what did it become? Planetside Forever? Was that a thing that got shipped? What was the free-to-play thing that got shipped?
Planetside Arena?
Was it Planetside Arena?
Yes.
Yeah, so everybody, like, there was a possibility before that shipped to have been able to work on it, and when that fell through, I mentally resigned from the job that I was in because of how heartbroken I was to not be able to work on that game. And this was well before it actually shipped, because I think that they ended up in a situation where they couldn't actually do the things that they thought they needed to do in order to make a great game, but they had to ship anyway. And it was kind of heartbreaking, right? But like, there was a whole plan and a whole design, and I remember talking to Andy and some other folks that I really like loved and really would have just fucking have been so happy to have been able to like work on, even in like a external role at a publisher. And I think that there was a plan that could have made that a fucking amazing game, and it wouldn't have been that hard to do. But because of some like very short-sighted executives on both sides, I think it didn't happen, and like it makes me very furious. But I did legitimately decide to quit a job the day that died.
Wow, that is wild. And it is. What they did with so few people, to me, was the best battle royale there's ever been. I know that's not really what they were going for, but what they made with just a few people was amazing. And
exactly, and it wouldn't have taken too much. Like it was sprinkles of functionality that was necessary to take it. I don't know. I was looking at it again several months before it shipped. I don't know exactly the state that it shipped in, like fully. I played it a little bit, but not enough to be like fully evaluating it. But at the point that I was looking at it, it seemed like it was like in striking distance of being something super fucking cool. Not like a huge box sales game, but it could have been like an organic growth game, like a Tarkov kind of thing, where over time it really grew into something extraordinary, right? Yeah. And it was super close to that, fucking close. And it was so heartbreaking to not be able to make the case to have that happen. I would love to work on another Planetside game.
What it suffered from is all the players really got is the Battle Royale end of it, and there was so much more coming. But Apex Legends popped out at right the same time. Even though it was an amazing Battle Royale, it just had no chance to compete in that space. So you didn't help the massive scale Planetside players, and the Battle Royale players had something else coming. So really tough break.
Battle Royale, H1Z1 obviously did amazingly well with Battle Royale, but H1Z1 did amazingly well with Battle Royale because of position.
Yeah,
they were able to beat the market.
Yep.
Not because of tech, right? And the thing that was like, it's such a fucking no shit Sherlock thing. I mentioned to you, like, the reason Planetside 2 was gigantically successful and a company like DICE couldn't do it was because there was a back end tech. That was the advantage that we had. It wasn't that we had great graphics programmers. It wasn't that we had an amazing FPS design. The advantage we had was the back end tech. They basically decided to trash that shit because instead of saying like we're gonna take this and figure out how to make this into something else, they were like, we're gonna chase Battle Royale, which doesn't need all of this. It needs a little tiny bit of this, but Battle Royale is a small enough problem space in terms of scale that all of these other developers can get there. And we've seen in the last 5 years that all of them have been able to get there. They couldn't get to a 2,000 person persistent multiplayer shooter, but they could get to this like 100 player, whatever, 250 player scale, right? Yep. And now we have Call of Duty doing it, and all these other ones doing it, and they're doing a great job with it because it's not... Like, all they have to focus on is doing the peripheral gameplay. Make this peripheral experience be fucking amazing, right? The core experience of it is relatively solvable.
Yeah.
If Planetside Arena had instead of done the thing where they decided to chase this, and again, if H1Z1 had done something a little bit orthogonal to what they did, where they leaned deeper into, this is the scale of what we can do this at, instead of trying to basically say, let's compete in this arena that everybody else can get to. If they had said, let's compete down here in this other arena that nobody can fucking get to because we're unique over here, but we're going to put that same periphery around it.
Right.
What could approach them?
Wow.
Nothing could. Right. Yeah. But it was like it was. I think it required too much. The delta in the periphery from this arena to this arena required too much brain power. And it was basically like, this is a risk, and we need to do the thing that's known. This is the thing that's known, so we would rather compete up here with everybody else than do something that's slightly unknown down here where we can compete on our own.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
So I understand it from like a business point of view, because you look at Planetside 2 and it didn't make as much money as like Battle Royale on H1Z1 made. So if you were going to bet the farm, I guess it makes sense to bet the farm over here.
Yeah.
But that's not the bet that I would make.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, final question for you. You already kind of touched on this. we're really, as Planetside 2 players, we love it. What you made as part of the team, but you were a big part of it. It's created relationships. It's created outfits. It's just brought a lot of joy to a lot of people's lives. And we're all looking forward to the future. We feel like Sony was the big guy with a lot of money, had a lot of passionate players and people and Andy Seitz and Smedley that would fight for the game. And now, we've kind of ended up in a holding company owns it, sort of. And, we have passionate developers, but no one's ever going to give it the look or the money it needs to go big. Why would anyone else attempt this space, or why wouldn't they? We're looking for your game developer knowledge. Would anyone else try to enter this space? What would it take for them to want to enter this space? Whether it was Star Wars or, whatever Battlefield, who would go to this scale? Or who wouldn't, and why wouldn't they?
That's a tough question. It's hard for me to think of anybody who would say, like, this is what we want to do. Because I think it's so unknown that a large-scale outlay against this is, like, difficult to imagine. Like, it's hard to say there's going to be a company that's going to bet $100 million, $200 million on developing a big, big game in this world. But I don't think you need that. Like, that's the thing. I think a Planetside sequel could be made reasonably inexpensive. I think now's the time to do it. I think you almost immediately capture the entire current Planetside 2 audience, right?
For sure.
If you make a good enough game, you can make as big of a splash as Planetside 2 did in the 2012 world today. Just because you're doing something unique. People are always going to come and look at something unique.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't see one of the big studios. Like, I don't think that there's a game company outside of, like, I don't know, maybe you get, like, if I was going to take a bet, if I had to do, like, one of these, like, real-time wager kind of situations, the only company I could see that potentially would be releasing a Planetside-like game would be Amazon Game Studios under Smed. I don't think anybody else is going to try to do it. And I don't think anybody else would have the resources to do it. And I think that almost all the people who worked on Planetside who are still working in games right now, who aren't, like, depressingly, a large percentage of them moved over to work on tax software.
Okay.
But, like,
probably a lot less stressful, right?
For sure, dude. Like, it's almost no work.
Yeah.
I don't mean to minimalize the fine people into
absolutely.
it, right? But, like, I think that it's a much more manageable life to be working on tax software than to be working on fucking MMORPGs.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the only one. Like, if I were to see a tweet saying there's a Planetside, there's a modern day game that's like Planetside coming out, the only person that I wouldn't be shocked, that's releasing that game would be Smed.
Yeah. It deep down in all of our hearts here, we're still saying, oh, Smed finally left for the big bucks. He fought through Tanarus and Infantry and all those little games. He built something amazing. Now he's got the big bucks at Amazon. Come on back. Don't forget about us. Bring the all-star team of Higby, Seitz, and everyone. T-Ray, get them all back together. Anyways.
If I wasn't sitting there, like, popping champagne on the launch day, I'd definitely be playing it.
Yeah, right on.
Guaranteed.
Matt, we really appreciate you coming on late at night from across the world to see us.
Yes, thank you for summoning me out of my irrelevancy into this fine little gathering here. This is great.
You still come up all the time. Sometimes
people care.
They do.
I'm wanted.
Do you know you're still in the profanity filter? So people that don't even know who you are still speaking your name in Planetside. So
I heard at one point they were going to remove me from the profanity filter, and I actually wrote a letter.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's bullshit. You guys can't do that.
Hey, we would have all signed petitions.
That's the last straw for de-souling the game if you remove my name from it. And happily, it didn't get taken out. But I think they thought they were going to get sued. Like, they thought I was going to sue them or something for making my name do that. Yeah. Somebody thought, like, actually, this is a little bit of a liability to have this dude we fired be the fuck word in your game.
Right, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you fought for it.
My letter indemnified them so that they didn't have to sue me.
Yeah. And then, so real quick, who do we follow? If we, when this thing becomes public or your stuff, do we follow a company? Do we follow you if we want to see what happens in the future?
I can't talk too much about what I'm doing, and I have nothing to follow these days, right? Okay. Like, I don't have any socials, so you can't find me. Leave me alone.
Okay.
But But I hope to hear from you guys someday. If I'm ever working on a Planetside again, maybe I'll get a. I don't know. Is there Twitter? There's Twitter, right?
There's Twitter.
There's still Twitter.
Okay.
I think I've read about that recently.
Well, enjoy some of your anonymity, and it was a pleasure, man.
Thanks, man.
Have a good one. Bye.
See you. Bye.